What's up, good people? Welcome back to the channel today for another review because we're getting ready to jump into season 4 and the return of Dark Side of the Ring coming back to Vice TV May 30th with its premiere episode. This episode is Chris and Tammy. We're going to talk all about it. Hopefully by now you have checked out the episode because we're getting ready to jump into spoilers. We're going to talk about this entire episode, our thoughts about it and whatnot. I am joined by a face that you definitely seen on the channel before. A friend of mine's, one of the hardest journalists out there. You may have seen his work on The Nocturnal. You may have also seen his work on DigiDay. I got my guy, my brother, Julian Cannon. Julian, how you doing today?
I'm doing quite great. And when I'm not speaking with marketing executives, I talk about entertainment.
One hardest man out there. But let's get into it. This episode is Chris and Tammy. By now, also too, you have seen each of our respective interviews with one of the creators of the Dark Side of the Ring, and Evan, and very interesting interviews. He's a fantastic person, a lot of hard work between him and his partner and his partner Jason. And we were super excited to check out Dark Side of the Ring because I think, both as just fans of entertainment, both connoisseurs of good documentaries, but also with intertwining of pro wrestling. We're not just talking about pro wrestling you're watching today, but we're tapping back into history, which also resonates with our childhood. And I think now that we have matured and, we've done heard rumors and, the message boards, the magazines, it's cool to be able to see these group of seasons of this docuseries really get the proper folks involved and get these stories out there. And I think that Evan and Jason do a fantastic job. And if you have not caught up with the Dark Side of the Ring, this is the first time you've ever heard of the Dark Side of the Ring. Not only do they cover wrestling, but they have a ton of other content in terms of the production and in terms of bringing out the truth to these stories. But we love pro wrestling, so we're talking about Dark Side of the Ring here, the 4th season, episode 1 of this one. And again, this is Chris and Tammy. So Julian, before we actually get into the episode, let's just go back down memory lane just a little bit here.
Oh yeah.
We're excited for season 4, and there have been rumors of what was going to be in season 4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, we'll talk more about that down the line. But for today, knowing that Chris and Tammy was going to be the first episode, number one, what was your prior knowledge of either of them? And what was your excitement about this being the premiere episode?
Yeah, Chris Candido, when I used to see him in the WWF in the early to mid 90s, he was with a tag team partner, which we now know as Tom Pritchard. And they brought in Sunny as well. I learned years later that they had their start at Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Saw them cutting a lot of promos, had a lot of good matches there. But Chris, I've always perceived him as a guy who could make it in the business. He's a little green at that time. But then years later, he went to ECW. That's when I really started to pay attention to his work. He was a great member of the Triple Threat, which was him, Shane Douglas, Francine, and Bam Bam Bigelow. Won a few belts there, got a lot of great mic time. Then he went to WCW, and I wish Darkseid kind of would have covered this, but I guess they didn't have enough time. But he went to WCW, went downhill there, then ended up in TNA for a cup of coffee. But we'll get to all that in a bit. Overall, I've always thought he was great. And he, just like Chris Canyon, he was a bit ahead of his time when it came to his mic skills.
Yeah, I said the exact same thing to Evan that, when Evan was hyping what this episode was going to be, a lot of what Evan was saying was like, this feels a lot of what I felt about Chris Canyon upon watching that episode in last season. But Chris, and I'll be transparent here. I've always sort of been fascinated with Chris. I didn't, as a kid, I watched wrestling and I just had fun with it. I didn't really care too much about what was happening behind the curtains in anyone's personal life. And honestly, I couldn't tell you what was a good wrestler outside of a bad wrestler. But I will say that Chris, one of the best finishers, as many are saying, one of the most devastating finishers of all time that doesn't get a lot of credit for, actually, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I just think that when he was in the ring, you always were interested. He was amazing on mic. I don't think he gets enough credit for that either. And I think, we can talk about Tammy in a second too, but Tammy was also very ahead of her time when it came down to managers and being on mic. But I think, I was never really interested in managers when it came down to wrestling. That, a lot of the times I just felt like they were distractions, but I thought Tammy was definitely like an impact, shall I say, in certain matches, in certain situations. I was a Queen Elizabeth, a Miss Elizabeth fan, excuse me. But other than that, I really wasn't looking at anybody else. I really didn't care. But Chris and Tammy was a good duo, and I guess it was just really disheartening, really getting to see what was truly happening with the two of them. But and very ignorantly saying, I'll just go ahead and put myself out there, upon hearing Chris untimely death, a lot of us as kids, and whether I'm obviously speaking for myself, but others, a lot of folks always suspected that it was steroids because the steroid use ran crazy in pro wrestling.
Let me tell you this. When did you find out he passed away?
TNA.
At 2005 also then.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, 2 days before he passed away, he was going to be at the Hardcore Homecoming. And then next, just for appearance there. So he pretty much had to choose between either that or TNA. Had he not gone on that airplane, he would have been alive. But we'll get more into that in a bit. But when I found out, it was through one of those RSPW threads that I used to be on. And I thought to myself, wait, I just saw him on TV 2 days ago.
Same.
How did this happen?
Yeah.
So at the time when a lot of other wrestlers was dying from drugs and steroids, we, just like as you said, we all thought kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Until the word got out that he died from pneumonia due to the blood clot.
Yeah. Right. And so, this kind of seeing the story overall now, which is why I love Dark Side of the Ring, because it puts to bed a lot of ignorance, and a lot of folks like to think that ignorance is like a word of like disrespecting somebody or whatnot, but like ignorance is truly like because the lack of like education or knowledge. And like, so with that, I love the fact that like they're able to cover and really inform folks about truly the details of it. And in this episode, you had his brother involved, you had his mother involved, you had his tag team partner involved, you had Lance Storm, obviously you have Jim Cornette, Jericho is narrating, so the right people that's involved. But I guess starting with his story and just seeing somebody who was so dedicated to the business, who truly didn't seem like anyone could have said anything bad about him. It's rare that you see somebody like Jim Cornette emotional in the way he was. And whether you like or dislike Jim Cornette, he's a wrestling historian. He has endless stories and knowledge. And again, whether you like him or not, but I think it's undenying how emotional, how much this affected him. And I even think as viewers, much like you said, one day he was there, one day he wasn't. And I think that that hurts us as fans, because you're just like, wait, what? But like, imagine being on the road with these folks. Imagine somebody like Jim Cornette who felt like this guy had the utmost potential, who had seen him have his low moments, but also seeing him trying to work his way back. And I mean, granted, that's what pro wrestling is. That's why we like it. We like to see our favorites. You got to take some losses in order to climb back up. It's the story of all characters, superheroes, anything in comic books, any video game, especially in pro wrestling. So like seeing his life be really based around that, and for it to come to an untimely death. I mean, 33 years old. I don't know, 2005, I forget how old I was then, but like 33 is still entirely young, and he accomplished a lot, which I'm gonna give it to you 1 second, but I just want to say, like, it literally had me choked up seeing his mom speak about how much she's done in the 33 years. She blames herself, which is another thing, but like how proud she is of saying, like, man, he did a lot in 33 years. And I think like for somebody to possibly be looking down back at their, at his mother, to be like, man, like, I guess he didn't, no one would think they would go that young, but like for him to kind of look at his mom and say like, yeah, I did a lot, and my mom is proud of me. I think that's a win in a sense. And like, I thought that was like a really heartfelt moment, but also still very sad because 33 years old, and as you mentioned, held championships in ECW, WWF. I mean, anywhere he went, he held champions, and it seems like no one could say anything bad about him. And I think that says a lot. And we'll talk a little bit more, but I guess for you, when you overall think about his career from the territories, from the different promotions, from these wrestling almost, I was gonna say guys, but wrestling legends that has spoken about him, Foley and Lance, and from what you knew then, from what you have learned now, just overall, what is your assessment about the career of Chris?
10 years. 10 years from the mid 90s till 2005. He's done a lot. Not a lot of people could say that in a short time span before he even turned 30. So that's quite impressive. But Chris Candido, again, was another guy who I felt like that could have gotten more pushes in the WWF, but was held down due to backstage politicking, especially when Shawn Michaels was running the show, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's very, going back to the episode, the way his brother described the day of his death was very sad. And
Yeah.
I'm also somebody, and I never knew he had a brother up until that episode aired. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. Loud.
So that was pretty sad, along with the fact that it just makes you double think what could have happened if he never would have went on that airplane.
Yeah. We'll talk about Tammy because it is about the two of them, but I just want to say the opioid crisis, which is still very much a thing, especially in my area, hearing folks being the addiction, and when you actually know about how opioids are distributed to patients and big pharma and their involvement, it's again a sad story because everyone can only say but good things about him, and quite frankly, Mick said he was straight edge. He wasn't a person that did anything. He couldn't imagine him going from 0 to 100, and it makes you think in terms of the mental of Chris was like, he loved the business so much he was willing to do something he would never typically do, and even by the doctor's guidance to start taking these painkillers or muscle relaxers, and it just completely was almost like a safeguard for him to still be able to wrestle, but also dealing with the heartbreak with Tammy, which we'll talk about. But like, it just to kind of see this story of somebody who was just completely addicted, battling his sobriety with this, but also still working effectively in the wrestling ring, just shows you that his passion was one of the biggest of any wrestler that we've seen. And I think that you talk about getting on the plane, and I think that's just it. It's hard to say he went against his own discretion because, frankly, that's what his whole career was based off of, was saying that I needed to continue to wrestle. I need to continue to be there for my fans. I need to bounce back from everything I've been through. And while that wasn't the ideal thing, and as you said, you seen him 2 days ago, his brother said, I just talked to him. You got Jim and you got Tommy Dreamer even saying like they just talking, just seeing this guy and then he's gone. I mean, it's truly a sad story. And just to imagine what his legacy would have been if he was able to just put in another 10 years. And granted, he came in that era of TNA when TNA was one of the hottest things popping on TV. And, freakish injury, people bounce back, injuries happen, but he still came out with the injury. He wasn't going to fade away. He said, I'm going to make sure, like, I'm still, I don't want to use a pun and say I feel my impact, but granted, I walked myself into that, but he wanted to still make an impact there. And it just shows you a lot about it. I've always respected him as the wrestler. I think this episode helped me really respect him as a person. And granted, no one wants to see somebody sacrifice their body in the way he did, because like the doctor's looking at his x-rays and saying like, dude, have you been in a car accident? And granted,
wasn't that something about his neck, man?
Crazy.
It just makes you double think of all the shit we used to see a hero back then. I'm like, you don't need to do this anymore. In today's world, that wouldn't fly. But back then, wrestlers felt like they had to do it.
Yeah. Amazing finisher, which has has a lot to do with it. And yeah, the cause and effect is just it's a really eye-opening thing. But
it's crazy. He didn't start doing that move until he went to ECW.
Right.
He didn't Smoky Mountain. He didn't do it in the WWF. I think it's more of an ego thing. Hey, if Sean saw that, he would be like, you're not doing that move.
Yeah, and no doubt. And we gotta make sure we talk about Sean, but let's talk about Tammy because she's the other part of this. Just over your overall, man. Let's focus on the historical stuff with Tammy. What's sort of been your impression with her initially, and did you learn anything new about her?
Honestly, I didn't learn too much new about her because all the stories that's been going on over the years, it's been documented. But back then, when I first saw her, I thought to myself that she was a 90s version of Sherry Montel, the way she used to manage in the 80s and in the territories before then. She always used to get in the guys' faces, get herself involved with a match, get herself trying to interfere and all that stuff. So that was cool for what she did. She became the most downloaded diva, as an air quote, in the 90s. I'm like, that was before Sable came into the picture. Makes me wonder what would have happened if Sable came before Sunny. That history would have been totally different. But as far as Sunny on this episode, I wish they would have talked about what led to Sunny being out of the WWE, because what they didn't cover was the reason why she had backstage heat. Do you know this story?
I don't. And before you go over it, I let me give you my thoughts about it too. Sunny, you mentioned is Tammy Sytch. I think that the highlight of her skill and her talent. I'm also not mad at her wanting to be involved in wrestling in the means of wanting to be next to her boyfriend, but also saying I could potentially make some side money outside of being in the medical profession. So I think, while a lot of folks resort to bartending as like their side job in order to make that extra cash, she found a way to kind of like really strengthen her relationship, but also make good money. So I have no problem with her getting into the business.
But of course not.
But like understand that like the famous promo that she make in terms of being pro Hillary and how that gets heat in the territories, which is brilliant, by the way. Jim Cornette didn't want to, pat himself in the back, but he gets props for that. And there's still wrestlers to this day that still in the independents do that sort of cross political thing to kind of.
Oh yeah, of course. Heat, I mean, when New Jack was also looking out, and he did something very similar to there too, especially since there's too many racist shitheads over there that didn't like it. But too bad for them.
And the other really famous wrestler who also had a documentary on Vice TV is the Progressive Liberal, who was like, listen, anything with the Democrats, he's repping, and he's going to go down into the Southern Territories and draw heat, and he definitely did. But I think that she addressed some important things, and it's the prejudice. Her getting into the business was definitely like she's a pretty girl, and then we already know how it is because it's still that way now, where it's just like, well, what are you doing here? And while her boyfriend was good and respected, that probably shielded a lot of it. But the moment he got to the big leagues, he wasn't going to be able to shield that same level of protection because he was still trying to earn his keep, which is what I feel ultimately drew the heat, because folks probably thought like, oh, she doesn't want to sleep with me, or like, oh, she thinks she's so good because she's with her boyfriend and whatnot. And granted, I don't know the story. That's why I wanted to bring this out first. We know these stories, and we know the ego is bad. They highlighted Shawn Michaels, but like, come on now, in that era, Shawn Michaels being your top guy and everybody think he's the biggest ego. Imagine that person that was a couple of ticks under him who thought they were the top guy that also had the ego. And you could imagine that all those folks felt like, oh no, this is new meat in this locker room. She's mine. And while she's good at what she does, she works a character, which is what you're supposed to do. I could imagine backstage, folks are probably thinking like, yeah, but I'm the boss around here. This is how I run things. And she's not confining with it. And then I could even imagine that there was probably some heat where when the Sean thing happened, folks were kind of like, oh, so you like him now? Or you with him? Okay, cool. Like, what happened with me? Why you didn't want to give me no love? Like, I just could imagine all those sorts of different things happening, dude.
Especially the fact that when her and Sean got together, that led to Sean cutting an unscripted promo of Brett. Then next, these two got into a huge ass fight. But the reason why she was ousted in WWE was because her and Sable got into it over Sable bringing, I believe it was either Sable or Mark Merrow bringing their daughter in backstage at one time. Mark Merrow went to the ring for his match. Sunny was with the daughter. The daughter asked Sunny where is her father. Sunny told the daughter that he is dead, and then Sable came into the dressing room and a fight ensued.
Well,
I'm surprised Darkseid did not include that.
Yeah, well then, I didn't know anything about that. I think I don't know, man.
Yeah, it happened shortly after the Over the Edge pay-per-view in '98.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when it happened.
Yeah, it's just certain things that like seems very like predictable in terms of how things kind of played out, but I just think like maybe some of the heat she got most of the time is unjustified. I thought like maybe this is a potentially one. But like, they even like they say in the documentary, there was an issue where, folks felt like she was cocky, but like,
yeah, she also no-showed a bunch of shows too, and even faked a miscarriage to get time off.
Well, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. And again, like I think from what we know, how bad is that compared to the horrendous things that we know were really happening back there, And I think it's very easy to look at her and just be like, okay, cool. Now I say all that to say, that's what I felt back then. She has not helped herself at all currently. Everybody knows exactly what's going on right now with her. She's facing a manslaughter case in 2022. It's not looking good. She's getting ready to do some time. She has her downfall. You might as well call it drove herself off of a cliff at this rate because it has not been pretty. She's been very much in the news every single. I don't know. It seemed like before 2022, it was like every other week, and granted, we text all the time and it's just kind of like, again, all right, go next. You know what I mean? But
yeah, it's completely endless for her. And honestly, I just hope that she gets sent straight to prison after this. And I understand the Darkseid couldn't even get a comment from her about it was her lawyer that sent that, not her.
Yeah. And that's probably the smart thing. And then,
it's smart though, but it just makes you wonder why. So
yeah, because you give her opportunity to say some things. What might she say? And like, do you even want to risk that where it could be detrimental to her case where she's facing some serious time? There's nothing light about what she's going through and what ultimately may be the result of this. So, but I will say this though, just to kind of give a little bit more context about everything. Her going with Sean and his ego. We know Sean was running games for Vince McMahon during that time, so like just makes sense. That part checks out like indisputable, But like Chris,
luckily Hulk Hogan wasn't there, or else the backstage politics would have went to the max.
Yeah, I mean, and then again, he might not even have been, like you have to think about some of the other names that were still around that was still very big. Like, granted, we know Sean to be one of the biggest names, but Sean wasn't one of the biggest. Was not only the biggest star at the time, which makes you think like, who else could have had some tidbits about what was going on underneath them. But for Chris, though, I just think that it's sad because he was heartbroken. He didn't want to speak out about it because he didn't want to ruin his chance. He was so dedicated to the business that it even had him kind of like, be taken advantage of with his relationship. They almost extorted it and then used it against him. And eventually he never really got big as his potential. Everybody knew what his potential was. There was no way he was ever going to be bigger than Sean. Could imagine some of the details that was left after that. But they said Sean and her had a thing because Sean felt like he can do it because he was the top person, which is just really nasty to kind of hear. But he just kind of weathered the storm because he was hoping that eventually it would turn for the better and he would, get his big break. So it's kind of sad to kind of see it, that way. But I guess for you, when it comes down to Sunny and Chris, What was your thoughts about like a lot of the current stuff, like the final days for Chris, but ultimately how that relationship dissolved? Because we heard her say, and Terry said it, like she had no regrets. Like she didn't. Sunny wasn't a part of this, but there was obviously archival audio footage embedded into this from her previous interviews from like 2020 and beyond, obviously before the real bad stuff and probably became super unavailable and whatnot. But like we seen her really speak in a way of like no regrets, and like
that just a prime example of her trying to do whatever she can to get on top, whether if it's leaving her boyfriend she met in high school or going with guys like Shawn Michaels to the bar. I mean, even at the reenactment they did with the hotel, wherever that was, I'm just wondering to myself, did Chris actually see that happen?
Right.
Before he was forced out of the room. But Chris's death, I will say this, it did affected Sunny. I think it kind of not excluded, it excavated to her eventual downfall, because before this, she was starting to get clean again. But then after he passed away, she just went to a downward spiral with her.
Yeah. I felt that way. I definitely did feel that way. And I think that, one way or another, I mean, they were truly in love. I like to take the side of the mother here, and the mother basically saying that, it was without a doubt. The brother also saying it's without a doubt they was in love with each other. I think Sunny probably got addicted to the limelight of being with the top person, the attention that it had. Who knows what type of other business opportunities that may have had on the side. And she lost sight of what got her there. And granted, we all know how people are. Some people forget where they come from. And I think this is just what that is. But I think without a doubt, I think that it definitely did affect her in her own and in her way. She was chasing the limelight, got addicted to, all sorts of different things. And Chris is here, and he pretty much, was dealing with the injuries, coping with the heartbreak. And still very much trying to survive in the business. So he ended up going towards the opioids that got him addicted, which again, it doesn't take much for a lot of folks who need it actually, and being prescribed it in a dangerous amount outside of somebody else who went the other way with it, with drug and substance abuse and whatnot. So it's a sad story one way or another with both of these folks. And I don't know.
Yeah,
man.
The drugs they used to get, man, they used to down them shits like it was candy, especially in the mid 90s when they had no rulings on these whatsoever.
Yeah.
Especially those somas too.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, man, is there any other aspects of this you want to cover? Any other bits of the backstory that you are familiar with that you wanted to share some light on?
One more thing I wanted to cover about this episode. I loved all the artwork they had. I'm like, the brother went into that room and it felt like they never even left it for 15 years. So that one was still there. Cool to see all the drawings and the photos when he was younger, because I never saw those up until that episode. So that was quite cool. I also did like the editing here of this episode, even though I wish they could have added the Sable and Sunny backstage fight. That would have been a good train wreck to see, to be honest.
I mean, who would have had account of that though?
If Luna was still alive, she would have, because she saw it. I mean, Terry Reynolds was also in the episode.
True. And I guess we should mention that, Terry and her had a very, I will say that Terry just seems, and I guess everybody should, but I just feel like Terry felt very disappointed by her. I think Terry's just kind of looking like she just can't believe that this would have been her downfall. And it's hard to disagree with her on that note, man. I just think that, knowing how much potential she had and just seeing how this all played out, I think it's really difficult for her to really be a part of this without this being able to have to express like just the utmost displeasure and just disappointment in everything that she's done. And granted, I'm just gonna call it what it is. Sunny was smoking when she got into business, and
Yeah,
everybody's
keyword
age.
was.
Yeah, everybody's age, and everybody, you know, regard, especially back in the well, we can say this now, but the hardcore Vince McMahon days, you know, Vince McMahon going to have his requirements. She did not need anything. She was the Vince McMahon package, but you know, at some point he still gets unsatisfied and the business changed. And as she was a part of the sexy era coming through, you could imagine that like she wanted to make sure that she was still that top person. With that being said, you can see where the drugs came into play. And I don't know who she is as of 2023, but when they started to show some of that current, like her being in court and whatnot, I was like, who is that? But you know, obviously we see her in the news all the time, so I know. But like, it is kind of crazy to see this fall off of this unlikely transformation. And shout out to Terry. You know, she's been around for a while. She still looks good, and it was just good to see her. It was good to see her be involved with this, but you can just tell just how disappointed you were. This is not.
Yeah, I could really tell because when Sunny came in, with the exception of China, even though she was coming in at the same time, China was older than Sunny, along with Terry, Sensational Sherry, and a few of the other women they had there. But when Sunny came in, she was a kid.
Yeah.
So I had to put that in perspective. If she would have came in maybe in the 2000s, I think she would have fit a lot better in that women's locker room than the 90s when all the other women were much older than she was.
Yeah.
I'm also, sorry to add this. I'm also glad that this episode focused more on Chris Candido than it
as it should. Yep. Thank you for that, because while this is Dark Side of the Ring, they do a good job in really shedding light into some of these unsung heroes. You know, Evan also mentioned he was a big fan of Chris. Totally agree with him here. And it was good to be able to see him celebrated in a way that hopefully has people reroute those flowers that he deserved, because he was a pioneer one way or another. And I think that he had done a lot, sacrificed a lot. And I just think it was a really beautiful thing to see his brother speak about him, his little brother, who obviously looked up to him to the utmost, and the mother who just the utmost proud of him, but also very sad that she blames herself for him and has that thought of like, I wish I could have did something, which, you know, hopefully she doesn't live by guilt by that, because, you know, I think he knew what he wanted to do. She knew what he wanted to do the entire time, but as a mother, that's just kind of like the weight that she wants to bear. But great episode, folks, for the first premiere episode of The Dark Side of the Ring. This is season 4. We got a lot of episodes coming this season. Again, you can check out
the list right in front of me.
And I think, you know, we're starting off with Chris and Tammy, ending with Marty, Jannetty, which should be a story in its own. Imagine that, both the beginning and end episodes dealing with Shawn Michaels in the background. Yikes. But so many other things too. Adrian Adonis.
I was going to say we have
Junkyard Dog,
Magnum TA, Bam Bam Bigelow, Abdullah the Butcher, the Graham family, and WCW Bash at the Beach 2000.
No, you can't wait for that.
Oh yeah, dude. Did you watch that pay-per-view in real time in 2000?
Of course, yeah. But again, I was young, so sometimes you don't know right from wrong, you know, you just like, but like, yeah, even as a kid, you can sense something was off here. And what would it be if it wasn't for Vince Russo and Hogan not being on the same page? It wouldn't be wrestling if it wasn't. So
yeah, I know. I've asked Steven if this episode will be focused on the show itself or the incident. And he told me it's going to be more on the incident, along with the fact that it's been 20 years and nobody could even get the facts right.
Yeah.
So they wanted to have this episode structured like the Montreal Screwjob and the Collision in Korea episode to kind of soothe the mood before we get back into the dark shit on the next episode.
Yeah. Well, folks, check out this episode if you haven't. I don't know how you listen to all of this and you have now, but either way, just stick around for the entire season of Dark Side of the Ring. It's going to be a fantastic one. Get in the comments, let us know your thoughts about this episode. Again, this is the Chris and Tammy episode, the premiere episode of season 4. Give Julian a follow on social media. It's in the description below. And stick around. We got more reviews, content, and so on here at Big O Belt Media very soon. Thank you for watching, folks.
Peace out.